Good evening. Today we'll be talking as well about the emerging technologies, but from a different point of view. We'll be focusing on startups, especially in the Middle East and Africa region, to understand what are they really doing, who are the governments, the accelerators, the venture capitalists that they are today funding them. This has been growing in the last years in the region. Many people decided either to join startups or start their own startups. We've seen many countries today trying to encourage the people to move into that direction to help with the employment and to help in supporting their economies. So today I'll be joined with Faisal AlBitar. So Faisal is the Innovation Hub Manager and Head of Arab Bank Accelerator Program. We'll be talking about different topics around startups. So please, if you have any question or comment, leave it in the comments section, whether it's on LinkedIn or YouTube, and we will try to discuss it during this live broadcast. Faisal, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sama, for having me.
Appreciate it, Faisal. So as I mentioned in my introduction, so we'll be focusing on emerging tech startups in the Middle East and Africa region. And let's start with the first topic. So today, can you probably give us, from your point of view, since you're doing a great job in funding startups, helping them to access the market and directing their thought and their products and services into the right direction. Can you give us a little bit of a background about, what's the status of these startups in the Middle East, Africa? How do you see it right now? And what comments you might have around it?
Great. I mean, going on the point of where do we see the startup scene today, the startup scene in the MENA region, I would say, is still in its early stages. However, we're seeing a tremendous growth. I've been in the industry since 2013, 14. I've been quite engaging in that time, and I've seen a tremendous growth in terms of new startups coming into line, new investors coming in, and a lot more traction. And where we are today, we're definitely seeing a lot more growth going forward. And I think one reason of this is really the emergence of COVID. COVID was a major black swan event. It did impact public markets. It did change in customer behaviors and our customer behaviors and the business behaviors at an unprecedented scale. However, if you look at certain industries like technology, these certain industries actually greatly benefited. There's a lot of economists talking out there talking about how this looks like a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped or an L-shaped. I personally think it's a K-shape, where the performance of different parts of the economy can diverge quite significantly. And this is where you have certain businesses that are recovering fully and quickly, while you have others that are suffering greatly, right? So the ones that are suffering greatly are more offline businesses. These are your restaurants, your travel, your hospitality industries. As opposed to when you look at industries like technology, they have benefited greatly. And that we're seeing now in the region, there's a number of growth of online entrepreneurs. And, just going back to what I was saying, 2010 to 2013, the number of online entrepreneurs were quite a few. And it was not something that was quite popular. I mean, if you had told your parents that, I want to become an online entrepreneur, that was not something that they really encouraged. They would have pushed you more to be an engineer or a doctor or something in finance. And the reason is, I don't think people at that time really understood the scale of starting an online business. And that is slowly changing. And we're seeing that as well changing in terms of startups, in terms of the number of startups that are coming into the business in various verticals. And also, as it increased the number of startups, you're seeing more investors coming in. I mean, again, I remember my early conversations, in 2015, where at that time the market was maturing. You had more investors, more startups across the region. It wasn't just concentrated in one or two countries. But when you would talk to investors at that stage, a lot of investors were more asset-based investors. They wanted to invest in a building, in a car, something that they can actually hold, something that's quite intangible. And right. there are those reasons, because when you invest in intangible assets, at liquidation there is something to liquidate. But when you invest in intangible assets, most times there isn't that much anything to liquidate. An online business, probably the only assets that they have is their laptops. But we're starting to see that mindset is shifting, and that is really being proven by the full cycle, where now you're seeing regional success stories like Careem, Souk, and InstaShop that are being bought by large international players. And that really gives a validation that the cycle of the market, that the online business is not something of a phase, but is now becoming the true new reality. Maybe just to share some, share some statistics. If we look at the first half of just 2020, we saw more than $600 million invested in MENA-based startups. Now, take into factor that a lot of these startups actually started raising in 2019. So that wasn't really, they had actually started in 2020. They started in 2019, but secured their funds in 2020. Countries like Egypt, Saudi, saw more than 100% increase in total funding year over year. So that also shows you that there is a growth. Obviously, you'll start to see that the larger growth of concentration lies within Egypt, Saudi, and UAE, which is quite normal because these are your largest markets. But even looking at it obviously we're still not post-pandemic, but as the economies become unfrozen and certain restrictions starts to drop down, we're starting to see that appetite now is increasing. Investors are looking to still invest, are looking to invest in startups, and we're seeing certain industries that are quite growing more than others. These are your e-commerce, your fintech, your education tech, and your health tech. And that's where we're seeing our appetite.
That's a good point, Faisal. Allow me just to comment on it and maybe share, these findings from the World Economic Forum about the startups in the MEA region. And you touched on that right now, saying, we can see, mainly UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, always in that list. But we can, based on the WIF report, we can also see Jordan, Lebanon, and a few in other countries. My feedback, when I look at this one, it's again, you can see the countries that they have big markets and big funding, maybe because they're strong economically. And you can also see the countries that they might not be as big in terms, of market size like the other countries, but they have the talent. And they have the knowledge, and they have the people who are interested to do work. At the same time, they might be countries that you can probably hire with, maybe lower salaries maybe than other countries, and you can provide services, of a kind of an offshoring service, right, for other companies and businesses. What you see on the screen are the top 100 of the Arab startups or promising Arab startups that were selected by the World Economic Forum. As we mentioned, they are across the region, but mainly in 4 or 5 countries. The interesting thing about it, when you look at, for example, the fintech startups out of these, that's in a way or another related to the emerging technology startups, we find 14. So that's almost 14% only out of the top 100 chosen that they are in the fintech space or around the technology space. And we can see some known names here from Madfu'at.com to Postrocket to Halala and so on. Why do you think the percentage of the technological startups are not higher than this 14% from the top 100 chosen? Is this normal in this stage that we're seeing right now in the Middle East, Africa, about growing the startups, or you believe this could be higher, but there is something pushing them back?
Mhm. So I think if you look at that number in particular, I think that number has changed to where we are today. And especially because, I mean, picking on fintech is quite a nascent industry, right? However, there has been a tremendous growth of fintech startups
Mhm.
opening up markets and across the board where you showed throughout there. I think one reason why maybe at that time of the report the number of fintech startups was quite little. One being it's quite nascent. Two is high regulated industries take time to mature because there are dependencies for it. One dependency is regulations.
Mm.
If you look at, and if I compare that to markets that are well-known fintech hubs like Singapore, like London, the reason why they've become the fintech hubs is because they have progressive regulations. And these progressive regulations become the enablers.
Mhm.
And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, we're seeing it now here in the region. A number of regulators have actually started creating their own sandbox environments where startup can actually now test their solutions in order to become as a co-learning opportunity to understand what are the licenses that needs to be put in place. But more importantly, as you promote innovation, how can you put the right customer safeguards? And that, I think, if you look at that itself, and a great example is what Saudi is doing. If you
Mhm.
look how progressive SAMA is, you'll see that the number of fintechs in Saudi is exponentially growing, or the number of fintechs actually moving and setting up in Saudi is also growing. So, right, like you mentioned, fintechs that have started in Jordan and Lebanon, where you have quite rich talent resource that are not only solving challenges on a local level, but on a regional level. And
Right.
these startups will always look at those specific markets where you have the most progressive regulation to start up with. I think another thing why now you'll start to see the number of fintechs growing is because fintech is really the infrastructure of any industry. It is the main number one enabler. If you look at e-commerce as an example, in order to have really the e-commerce experience, you need payments. You need that enabler, and we're seeing it. I mean, payments itself by end of 2020 should increase more than $69 billion, and that's online payments, just online payments. And that's where you're talking about the society as an overall geography is more still cash preference. But I think with
Yes.
COVID, you're starting going to see that, and that's going to decrease much more going forward.
Um, it's very interesting when you mention Sama as an example in Saudi Arabia, and I do agree. I mean, when you look at, for example, the regulations and how they were probably the first entity across the Middle East, Africa to come up with regulations around even cybersecurity for the fintech or how startups can contribute to this sector, and this does encourage not only the startups within Saudi Arabia but across the region. And you're right. I mean, you could establish something in Lebanon or in Egypt or in Jordan, but you'll be targeting the region, and it's very important and honestly very interesting to see how one country can even influence the ecosystem, the countries around it, from the startups and what they can do. So since we already started talking about the second pillar, about the challenges and what we're seeing, so we did actually ask the AI, the artificial intelligence or GPT-3, to see what are really things that we need to do, or what are the things that are slowing down the progress of the startups and technology startups in the region. So let's listen together in this short answer from the GPT-3 or the AI for this question.
A suitable location for technology startups is a place with low living costs. It has to have cheap labor and the minimum amount of regulation. The availability of talent is also important. A technological environment is important as well because talent will be limited if there isn't a research and development sector in the country. Now, as for the Middle East and Africa region, it has one major problem that is preventing startups from being created. A major problem that is preventing startups from being created in the region is the lack of a culture for independent thought. It is also difficult to get funding because most of the entrepreneurs in the region are only interested in starting businesses that are guaranteed to succeed. In this region, you will always find an entrepreneur who only wants to start a business that will make him or her rich rather than create value for people.
Do you think so, Faisal? We might agree, we might not, but do you think when we focus on the founders, let's focus on the founders, right? Do you think still a big percentage think about the startups as a way to make money rather than solving a problem? And if it's true, why do you think the culture was, happened in this way? Let me say it. What's your point of view?
So, so there's definitely some sort of points that I agree with what has been said, but I don't agree that the general image is that founders in the region are starting businesses to become rich. Are there founders that are in the region and globally behind that story? I agree. I think Silicon Valley really created that beautiful image of, you start a business, it goes to unicorn, you exit this, you make a lot of money. But what it failed to really show in the news and in publicity is the challenges that it takes to actually get to a successful startup. So you definitely see a lot of these startups, but I personally think that a lot of these startups actually do not succeed. And I think it's the real startups that actually succeed are the startups behind the passion of solving the problem. Because when you're behind the passion of solving the problem, no matter what obstacle you have, you're still determined to solve that challenge. But when you're going behind the money and the money is your main core focus, more likely if you see what you're doing does not succeed, you're going to pivot, change, or just decide this is not the venture that you would want to lead with. And that's something that you can. That's one core thing I believe that a startup should have, the ability to pivot, but the ability to keep thinking of how to innovate and to solve that problem. So I think, yes, there are some sort of founders who think about that. Going on to your next point in terms of culture, I agree. There is still a risk-averse culture. And the reason goes, when we can talk a lot about this, but goes back to education. And I'll touch upon education on that. But I think, yes, as a region, you're brought up to look for, to go to school, graduate, get your education. Once you get your education, get a higher education in engineering and finance, in doctor. That's really where generally the line of the storyline ends up to. Very few do you hear the actual storyline that, no, take that risk, go start a business. It's okay to fail. And that whole failure aspect, I think it takes a while. Generally because maybe as well, there are certain cultures in the region that look at failure as frowned upon. Yet failure is the tuition for success. And in order to succeed, you need to fail. Now, I think I go back to my earlier point that I think that's changing. Again, if you talked about it in 2013, back then, parents would not encourage their children, would not encourage, family members would not encourage their own members to actually start their own business. Yet, today, I see that very much changing. I'm definitely seeing high caliber individuals who have graduated from high-end universities consider startup as their first job, as opposed to going to a Fortune 500 company. I personally chose very early on in my career to join the startup industry and not join the corporate world. I ended up in the corporate world eventually supporting startups. And I definitely see that there's a lot of people going in that direction. In terms of education, and I'd like to comment on the talent gap that that AI mentioned. I completely agree. I definitely think that we have a huge talent gap in the region. And not only do I see it, but startups see it as well. There is a gap in terms of recruiting high caliber developers. If it's from just certain app development or new emerging technologies like AI and machine learning. And these are the jobs that we need to accelerate and we need to actually grow. And the reason there is because I think education systems will need to change. Schools are still geared towards channeling graduates into public sectors and less emphasis on fields like mathematics and science. But in order to be able to create the digital economy of the future, we need to have our curriculum more reoriented towards STEM, more towards science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and less emphasis on social studies.
Right.
We also need these education systems to focus more on encouraging greater openness and innovation and risk-taking. And these are core components to really drive that change.
I agree, Faisal. I think, any change on a mass scale starts from education. It starts from the school, the university. This is how you build the culture. This is you build the culture of innovation, people trying things. It's okay to fail. It's okay to fail twice. It's okay to fail 100 times, as long as you're really trying to do something. I want to share a comment from Warda. She's actually watching us from France, and she just gave a comment about this, saying that Europe pushed the economic agent with the Green Deal Act to develop innovative solution in response to the new challenges like preserving common goods, preserving climate, green mobility, and so on. I think what she's trying to add here, saying also the governments and such as what they're doing in Europe, they try to put these initiatives around the green green power, how you can save the climate, and really push the startups not only to think about any problem, but try to think about problems that would benefit also the continent or benefit the climate change and so on. So that's a very interesting comment. Thank you so much. And I'm not really sure, Faisal, maybe we do have some encouragement coming from the public sector to solve maybe governmental issues, right? Going paperless, for example. Dubai is leading when it comes to adopting blockchain technology, going paperless soon, and they're really encouraging startups to think about this problem, because they say, if you do this, you're the technology startups, we're gonna adapt it, we're gonna help you. So maybe just a short comment from your side about that one before I go to the next question.
Yeah, like you mentioned, right? All governments in the region have a digital plan for the next 4 to 5 years. I think what you're going to see a difference is when they actually launch the new plan starting from next year, is that the time frame has actually changed, right? The reason is because everyone was moving digital, but everyone just thought digital comes with time. But the reality is, with COVID, this has really changed the whole story. Is that change now not only happens in years, but actually can happen in months. And with the whole change of customer behavior in businesses, governments today, in order to function for what the future holds and what today holds, these plans will need to be accelerated. So I'm sure we're going to start seeing that all these plans that we've been talking about for years and being implemented, they've changed. The time frame has changed. Time to market is now critical. And that also trickles down to businesses. Businesses, I remember having a lot of conversations with different institutions across the board, across different industries, where we would talk about digitization and they would talk about the importance of digitization, but you wouldn't feel that sense of urgency, right? That sense of acceleration. And I think now the reality is that if you don't digitize, you don't survive. And that will really show today that the real companies that are able to survive and succeed are the ones that are able to actually digitize and accelerate and provide these personalized experiences to what customers want today and to what customers have gotten used to.
Right. Let me move on. You today represent one of the top accelerators we have in the region, and you see, startups, I would say most of the time, and you try to evaluate them and maybe someone watching us today say, okay, how do you look at these startups? How do you evaluate them? Probably you look at them from a technology point of view, people, which means founders, the market they're trying to address. Are they really trying to solve a problem that makes sense, that has a big market or not, and so on. But before we start commenting on this one, Faisal, I'm going to take this question because it's related to this point exactly about, problems and startups. And here, Sam Abu Hajj is asking, how can we really transform the challenges that we're seeing in the region into an opportunity that we can maybe create a startup? So I'm rephrasing his question here, how we can look at the challenges, or probably which challenges we should today choose, right, as people who are interested to start a startup, and then transform it into an opportunity that, I can build something around it. So give us your comments about that, Faisal.
So I think if you're an aspiring entrepreneur looking to find a challenge to solve, I think the most important thing is the mindset that you go in with. I've had these moments where, myself looking for challenges to solve, or have spoken to entrepreneurs, and,
yes,
trust me, an idea won't just drop on your head. This whole Newton phenomenon behind it of sitting under the tree and having an apple drop on your head won't really happen. So you need to come in with the mindset of experimentation, where you can start with a very small problem that you're facing on a day-to-day life. Experiment and dig further deeper into it, or you can look at where the world is heading and what are the things that are impactful and things that will be needed, and you start from there. So to break it down into maybe smaller steps and action plans, think about your day. Think about throughout your day, what are the challenges that you're facing? Write them down. As you write these ideas down, the next thing you should be doing, as you write these problems down, the next thing you should be doing is go find out, is there other people like you who are facing these same pain points? If there are, then this is where I'd start to further dig deeper into it. And the reason why I say this is that you eventually want to find the right balance to say that this is no longer a hobby. This is not something that I'm just passionate about, but this is something that I can turn into a business, and that there's a lot more people out there who are passionate as I am. Once you are able to get to that fine balance, then this is where I would start taking the next steps. Figure out, how do you solve this problem? And by solving this problem, it's the value proposition that you're offering. As you figure out what is your value proposition, the next step is start designing your minimal viable product. This is something that does not require a lot of investment in time from your side, but enables you to put something in front of the customer in order to get feedback. And the most important aspect there is you need to get feedback. Don't build businesses from the basement. And I think this also goes to another storyline that we've always thought of, that the best businesses came out of basements and garage. Yes, but trust me, their heads were in the market. They were building these businesses in garages and basements and not interacting in an office, but their ears and eyes, they were in the market. They were figuring out what their customer wants and why do they want it. And they were passionate about the problem, not passionate about the solution. So this is how I would start and how I would take my approach in starting my own business.
Yeah, I mean, Faisal, today, I think, and you've mentioned this multiple times so far, you have to be passionate about something. You have to be really, really passionate about it, because most of the ideas and startups fail. And probably they fail not always because the idea is bad, it's because the founder gives up, or he's not very much passionate about it to keep trying and trying to find, the solution. The other point is, I would add, any idea you think of, there is always, a rule says, if there is a need and there is a lead at the same time, then probably you're on the right track, probably. So there is a need, someone needs it, and there are leads, people who are willing probably to use it or pay for it, then probably you are on the right track. So it's always very important to think, about your idea, the right way. And I would also add that it has to solve a pain and not represent a vitamin. It shouldn't be something nice to have, right? So it really should tackle something important for people to solve, as you said, Faisal, probably something we face in our day-to-day activities or life, and people would really care, to look at it and find a solution, and probably even try your solution, even if still not ready. I think that's a great sign always when you have this demand on what you're trying to do, even when it's not ready. I think that's great. So I think this is what you really need to look for. Let me take this question from Faris Bilbisi. So Faris asking on LinkedIn, looks like some accelerators, they don't sign NDAs, but I think that's more of a technical issue. I want to look at the second part of his question. So how can founders protect their innovative idea? So it looks like, and I honestly hear that from so many people, okay, I have a great idea. I think it's $1 billion idea. It's in the technology or emerging technology, but I'm afraid to go outside and talk about it publicly, or go to an accelerator, or go to an incubator. I want to comment about, if you allow me first, Faisal, then I know you're the expert, but in my opinion, all the ideas are worthless unless you start the execution and you really prove that it's a workable idea, something you really can get benefit out of it. Now to you, Faisal. What do you think?
I completely agree, and the reason why I was smiling is I work in an accelerator, part of a bank, but I used to also work in an accelerator that was focused on we were sector agnostic, so we were investing in all types of verticals. And definitely one of the most common thing that we used to get is, I'm not going to give you my idea before I actually sign an NDA. To me, and I say this with all truthfulness, I think NDAs are BS. I think it doesn't really protect your idea. But I agree with your point, Samer, is, again, ideas are worthless if they're not executed. So if you're afraid to share an idea that has not yet been executed, trust me, even if you share your idea with me and I try to copy you exactly, there will still be differences in terms of implementation. And one huge difference comes back to your passion, your experience, and your know-how into that solution than I have. I may, if we start this, I may be on the same level, but eventually you're going to be able to grow, you're going to be able to scale this much larger than I can, because I'm not as passionate, I don't know that as much. And going back to the accelerators, you need to understand what the business of accelerators. Accelerators are in the business of investing and supporting entrepreneurs. They make money when you make money. So it's not in their favor to actually steal your idea and to build it in-house, because one, they don't have the resources to actually start building these ideas in-house. Two, they're not as passionate as you are in building this single idea. And three, the way it works is their line of business is investments and supporting. So I wouldn't be afraid. Now, in terms of protecting your idea, I understand that. You don't want to go out and share the secret sauce, but I highly encourage you to talk about your idea. And the reason is because the more and more you talk about the idea, the more you may find more passionate people like you who are looking to solve that idea. And these could become your potential business partners to join you that way, right? And when you think about a team, when you're building a team, you want a team that's well diverse, that people can actually complement you. And I think one of the number one questions I used to always get was, where do I find a co-founder? I need a technical co-founder. Where do I go? And trust me, if I had that answer to that question, I would have probably made $1 million now, right? Absolutely. There isn't one-stop shop where you can go and find a technical co-founder or a business co-founder. The way you find them is through networking. And the way you network is you talk about your idea. Now, I encourage you to talk about your ideas, but you don't need to go into your secret sauce. So if you are building a technology that leverages, machine learning, you don't need to go out and talk about, the components of your algorithm.
Yeah, exactly.
But talk about, what your algorithm does and what's the value of your algorithm. So I highly encourage you to do that, because this is the best way to recruit people, as well as to get feedback.
This co-founder is a problem since ever, and it will continue. I like one of the comments I've seen or I heard before from some of the VCs. They said, finding a co-founder is like finding a wife. It's when you're with a co-founder, it's just a person who you'll share with everything, every decision. You need two guys have the same passion, the same vision, and it's a long-term relationship. So you need to really be, understand how, which co-founder you want to work with. Is he really as passionate as you are? Will he have the time and the resources and the knowledge to invest in you the same way you will do? So it's a very important question, I believe. Yes, probably a solo founder is possible. It depends, I think, on what you want to do. But definitely having a co-founder or two or four people who want to try to do something is usually much better. I think even from an accelerator point of view, I think you give maybe more points to the startups that have 2-3 people, working in it, because, it just shows that there is a team. If someone feels down one day, the other will encourage him. And it's very important, I think, in the startup world, because, it's just, it's like a roller coaster. One day you're up, one day you're down. So you really need to have that within the team. Now, I'm going to move to the last point, or the last pillar in our discussion today, Faisal, about the expectations and the future. But the question from Ibrahim Jaber is actually a good segue to this pillar. So Ibrahim is asking, how can we change the mentality, of traditional bankers in regards to working with fintechs? So in the technology world, when you come up with something new, if you go, probably not only for banks when it comes to fintechs, I believe any technology, when you go to traditional organizations, maybe people who are not very much technology oriented might push back, or might not be very supportive to change the status quo or how they're used to do things. What do you think is the best way to really approach the decision makers for the potential customers when you work in a fintech startup or an emerging tech startup? How they should approach it? Today, you also work for Arab banks, so probably the bank will get so many of these potential startups. How do you listen to them? How do you help them to put their ideas forward and give them a chance?
Mm-hmm. So I think, starting off, the true reality of today is that if banks don't work with fintechs, there's going to be a large market share that banks will lose going forward, right? Two, customer expectations have dramatically changed. Customers want to interact with banks the same way they're interacting with their Facebook, same way they're getting their service from the Ubers, and the same way they're consuming content from Netflix. These are the new expectations, and this is what are the expectations going forward. So I think the reality is, yes, previously banks were not thinking in that direction. Now today, it becomes more of a must thinking, because if you don't think of it in that direction, you're going to lose that market share. And you're not going to be able to offer the services based on your customer expectations. Now, I think, how do you approach banks? If you have a fintech startup, always look for a champion. And the reason is, with large incumbents, you have a hierarchy of scale. You have bureaucracy. You need to go through the bureaucracy. There are multiple decision makers. It's not like a startup where it's more of a flat structure, right? So finding who your champion is very important, because that is the person who's going to push the idea and is going to push the implementation through the multiple decision makers that is required. I think another thing is, think about the value. What value are you offering to the bank? Are you solving a problem in terms of a back office solution that the bank can benefit from, or are you solving a front end solution that can benefit the customers and the clients of the bank? And that's really important, because this is how you want to structure your story and really sell it to a bank or to any incumbent. I think with time, you'll start to see the mentality is changing. Like you mentioned, Samer, technology, at times does possess a certain threat, because a lot of large corporations would look at technology as a way to actually disrupt jobs. But the reality is, yes, it will disrupt jobs. Certain jobs will not become a priority of where the future is heading. But with technology, there are new jobs that are opening. And I think the bank and the large organization that understand that will understand that it is time to start thinking about how do we upskill our people? How do we change that mentality, and how do we change that mindset in order to work in that direction? Maybe as well on the point of how do you sell or pitch your business to a bank? Also, look for accelerators. Look for, like us, AB Accelerator, innovation departments. The reason why these certain departments exist and programs exist is really to merge the different cultures of a corporate and a startup under one common goal. And you'll see this not only in Jordan, but you'll see this across the region. There are multiple programs that are popping up in order to merge that. And I think that's important. I think an advice there, and this goes more to any business that is in the B2B space, but especially in the high regulated spaces like fintech, like healthcare, health tech, and so on. You need resilience. You don't expect to go with a solution and start selling tomorrow. It takes time. It's not like any other delivery app or food app that you can launch in the market tomorrow and start getting customers. It takes time, it takes trust. So build your business around that. How do you ensure trust to the partners, to your customers, and then how do you build this resilience that you're able to take on these long sales cycles? And then as you understand these dynamics, you start to think about it. How do I automate these sales cycles? What are the certain areas I need to invest in more in order to increase that speed of point of contact to actual signing the agreements?
Correct. And always a very good tip would be, look at the first 50 to 100 users, the first lead users that they really love your product. I mean, usually they say you need to look for a small group of people who really, really love your product. That would be much better of a big group of people who just like your product. Because the people who love it are the ones who are going to give you an honest feedback. They're going to tell you what you really need to do, what they love about it, what they hate about it, and what you really need to do. And it's very important for any startup founder to look at these people, understand always, who are your customer base, who are the people who are using it, especially the first few ones, and probably have an amazing customer service. I can tell you about how many products and services that I decided to just go and invest and try it. But the moment I just found no response for a problem, or I send an email and no one responds for a while, you just feel, I don't want to use it, right? So I think it's very important also to have a great customer service, even if you're in the beginning. So Faisal, I want to hear from you last few tips about, or how do you see the business of startups going on in the next 2 to 5 years in our region? What do you think it will flourish? What do you think is coming? And what should we really expect in that domain?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of expectations going forward, I think overall in the startup ecosystem, we're definitely going to see a lot more M&A activities. So a lot of more acquisitions. I think, the M&A transaction was really put on hold this period of time due to investors switching to focus more on crisis management and holding on their cash. However, at the same time, the technological adoption is growing day by day exponentially. And this, where it had been taking years, it's now is happening in a matter of weeks. So we're going to see a lot more larger organization from different industries focus more on digital and become more digital. And one of the most important aspect there in order to increase their digitalization will be setting up either more accelerators, more digital factories, as well as the activity of mergers and acquisitions. And this will really play a huge role in accelerating. So I see that from like a high level aspect. You will see a lot more consolidation, especially in the e-commerce industry. As we know, in the region, e-commerce industry is probably the largest industry that We're seeing a lot of funding being poured in there, and it's probably the most mature tech industry out of them all. So we're going to see more and more consolidation where your large e-commerce players start to buy out your smaller players that are either vertical niche or are focusing on certain products and certain geographies and customer demographics. I think as well we're going to see a lot more emerging technologies being played into the fintech and health tech, where cloud and SaaS becomes a reality, and this becomes the only way going forward. Where previously, technologies were either more expensive or tailored to enterprise solutions, on-prem. I think that's going to change, and I think cloud is an important segment that we need to have in order to see that growth going forward. With cloud and with these emerging of technologies, I think one important point that we're going to see as well is in the infrastructure. Better in terms of internet broadband, 5G, because a lot of these will need to be actually fueled by that. With that, you're going to see a lot more data and big data coming into the market. And that data is where now can be leveraged. If it's from IoT, where you actually have hardware devices using sensors to be able to take in data and transmit data in terms of your health, your next best, what could you be your potential purchase. So yes, we're going to see that a lot in there as well. I think certain industries that I'm quite bullish on, and we're going to see a lot more growth in, is obviously fintech. I think payments will likely continue to be hot and a competitive sector. We're going to see more growth in fraud prevention, digital identity management, and cybersecurity. As we migrate more of our assets online, we will need to grow our security, and how do we secure these infrastructures. Wealth tech is also something that we're going to see much more larger in there, where and that's also being played by the volatility in the market, the more interest for gold. We're going to see a lot more wealth tech solutions in the region. Insurance is another play I definitely see a growth in, because insurance has also been quite slow in the digitization and innovation. So insurance is going to be an industry as well. We'll see a lot more innovation happening. Finally, as we mentioned during this conversation, in order to have new technologies and new startups, governments will need to play a much larger role. And I think this is something we need to have. And I think this is something a lot of governments are now working on, where we emulate somewhat of what President John F. Kennedy did in the 1961, right? Where he made a decision to land on the moon and united everyone behind that common goal. And I think that as a region, we're going to start seeing that, where a lot of more cross collaboration will happen, and there will be more collaboration in terms of uniting to transform how we are doing business today and how we are dealing in our societies to become more and more digital. And that will really enable much larger opportunities for the younger generation and the generations, the generation X and Z, who are in the workforce or are coming into the workforce, new opportunities to continue in contributing to this digital economy. I can go on and on a lot more to what we're going to see and how this world is changing, but I think COVID-19 is definitely showing us where we're heading to and what could become the next reality.
True, and the changes that we have seen in the world in 2020, from the COVID situations to the cloud adoption to the advancements in emerging technologies and so on, and even in the regulations. Back to the question of Ahmed, you see on the screen, even the governments, how they're changing the regulations to make it easier to establish a startup, easier to hire people, easier to get funding, and even encouraging them and say, you know what, if you solve these problems, we will be your first customers, right? And we will host you and we will help you. So this is probably how, to Ahmed's question, the regulations can help today. And I think all these changes, although it caused some pain for the world, but on the other end, like the COVID, it helped us to think beyond and helped us to accelerate the digital transformation. Things that we thought it's gonna take us maybe 5 years to reach, now we're seeing it in 2-3 years. In the past, to develop a vaccination, we needed 5 to 10 years. Now we're doing it faster, right? So sometimes you need to be uncomfortable to come up with things and be innovative. And probably this is the theme of startups and how the founders need to think. So Faisal, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the discussion with you today. I'm sure for our audience, whoever is interested to reach out to you, he can look for AB Accelerator online, and he can reach out to you for more questions or understand how you can help these startups today. Appreciate your time, and thank you so much, Faisal.
Thank you for having, and thank you for everyone who has tuned in virtually.
Appreciate it. And to our audience, thank you so much for attending this session today. It will be recorded and posted on LinkedIn and YouTube, so you can watch it again. If you have any questions, please send us messages. If you have any suggestions for the future topics, please let me know. And I'm looking forward to see you next week, a new topic. Thank you very much, and take care.